Thank you everyone for joining the LifeQI webinar today. I'm looking forward to taking you through this particular subject. It's the first time we've run this webinar, so it's a little bit of an experiment for us. I hope you find it helpful and insightful and look forward to any feedback you have. Just a few bits of housekeeping to start with while people are still joining. First of all, some introductions. So in case anyone hasn't come across me before, I'm Jason Williams, been part of the LifeQI team since its inception, really. And I'm here to lead today's session, and I am joined and will be supported by my colleague, Andrew Stewart, who's going to be managing kind of the chat and the Q&A. You want to say hi, Andrew?
Hi, everyone. Like Jason said, I'm one of the colleagues here at LifeQI. I'm also one of the success managers. So I'll be here monitoring the chat and supporting Jason on this webinar. Nice to meet you all.
Thank you, Andrew. Yes, and in terms of the chat and the Q&A, please feel free to use both throughout the session, particularly any sort of general comments, throw them into the chat. If you just want to kick things off by saying where you're from, which organization you're representing, that's always interesting and helpful for us, so feel free to do that. Any questions you want to ask during the session, ideally put them in the Q&A. It just makes it a bit easier for us to kind of manage and triage them as we move through, but Andrew will do his best to pick them out of the chat if they appear there. I guess in terms of the format of today, in case you haven't joined a Zoom webinar before, we can't see you, we can't hear you. I'm afraid you're stuck looking at us and listening to us, but yeah, the chat and the Q&A is your opportunity to sort of voice your questions or any input to the session. And lastly, as you probably would have seen when you joined, today's session is being recorded, and an email will go out in 24 hours time with a link to the recording. So if you do need to leave early, don't worry, you'll pick up the recording tomorrow. Likewise, if you need to send that recording on to any colleagues, feel free to do so. Will be accessible by all. So that's sort of the housekeeping piece done. Just going to check in on it looks like the attendee number has sort of leveled off a bit. So start to introduce the subject and the agenda. In terms of the subject, our work with healthcare sector over the years has exposed us to, I guess, the intractable challenge faced by healthcare providers to both improve the quality of care while simultaneously minimizing costs. This is very much a double-edged challenge and seems to be perpetually intractable. It's not going away anytime soon. I guess I'm not going to pretend to have any magical solutions to that double-edged challenge, but what we do want to do today is draw your attention to how LifeQI can be used for more than just quality improvement, as it typically is. Today, we want to explore how LifeQI can be used for running and tracking cost improvement, cost reduction, however you want to call it, cost improvement work, as this is not as prevalent in the system, yet the functionality is there to assist in that. So today, using the agenda that we've got up here on the screen, we're going to explore these different topics. If you are well versed in how to use LifeQI, then you're not going to be surprised by any secret functionality that we've got hidden away. It's more about how do we use the functionality that people are aware of in the context of kind of cost-saving, cost reduction projects. So that's the idea, and we'll work through each of these subjects. Going to try and combine providing some insights, I guess sharing some best practice that we've seen, different organizations, particularly different countries who do more or less of this. Try and combine sharing some of that best practice in this subject matter with how to kind of do that in practice in LifeQI, basically. So it's going to be a bit of both as we go through. Let's dive in to the first subject. This is really less about LifeQI and more just about cost-saving projects and the types of those. And I do want to, I guess, maybe apologize in advance, not trying to, we're not experts in this subject as much as the audience today. I'm sure you've been doing this a lot longer than we have, and are much more closely kind of exposed to this sort of work. But we're just trying to share what we've seen elsewhere. So not trying to teach you how to do your job in that sense. But some of this might seem a bit obvious, but partly sharing this just to provoke some thoughts around the different types of projects. One thing that sometimes in our experience, we've come across teams are a little narrow, if you like, in terms of the sorts of work in this area that they're looking at. So yeah, high level, different types of cost saving projects. looking at cost avoidance and cost reduction, which seem like the obvious two types, partly cost avoidance. Some obvious examples there around reducing admissions in hospitals or reducing readmissions. It's not just about reducing costs, but often it's about avoiding costs. And so there's a whole avenue of work in that area that can lead to some very significant savings, basically. Cost reduction, there's a number of different types of examples there, and I'm not going to go through those in detail and explain what they are. You as an audience are going to be well more versed in those than we are. But certainly there are a range of opportunities to address those either in isolation or to combine them. But the third one we wanted to throw up on the page on the right-hand side, revenue generation, bit different, obviously, than kind of reducing cost. It's almost the opposite. And sometimes it's just that idea of kind of thinking outside the box, I suppose. It's not always about how do we save money. Sometimes it's about how do we generate more. And we've certainly seen good examples of this. We've even seen examples of this by QI teams themselves, looking at opportunities whereby they can generate an income for their department. Whilst they can't necessarily save any money, they do want to generate more to bolster their budget in order to provide them greater opportunity to do things. So yes, partly just this topic about thinking outside the box, being as broad as possible when looking for these sorts of opportunities, really. Okay, we start to dive into, I guess, the real subject matter and how that relates to live QI. The first subject we're going to talk about really relates to PDSA cycles. A few points on the left here, as I said before, about in terms of sharing some best practice. And again, hopefully this is the last time, I'll also apologize in advance, but going to talk a bit about how PDSAs work and the use of them, and appreciate that's bread and butter for a lot of people in the audience, but it's just trying to relate it to this subject matter. And in this respect, it's really about the PDSAs being the powerhouse of marginal gains and getting people to think about when they're trying to avoid or reduce costs. Often people sort of gravitate towards, well, what's the big ticket item that we could do that would save a lot of money? And often that's already been done, or doing that is very difficult because of the number of people, the complexity involved, the number of departments, etc. And so it's encouraging people to think smaller, basically, and to use the power of PDSAs to look for smaller opportunities and then to build on those opportunities, whether it be replicating them in other areas or building kind of different savings on top of each other and kind of building up the cumulative impact of that. So very much, looking at PDSAs as that powerhouse of marginal gains, starting small, proving things out in one department or in one office or in one unit, and then looking to kind of spread and scale that and add ideas on top of each other where possible. We've got a few examples. We'll dive into the software in a minute. We'll begin to have a look at that. It's also related to that in terms of those PDSA cycles, in terms of those, where are the ideas? What type of ideas have we got to change things to try and invoke some savings, to look at different types? Not the only types, but waste, duplication, delays. I think certainly when we do this sort of thing internally and everywhere else I've worked before, you can ask anyone in the team or the organization, and they will always have ideas as to where they've seen waste, duplication, delays, those sorts of things. Coming up with the ideas is not necessarily the hard part, but it's then capturing all of those as PDSA cycles, and then using the PDSA cycle kind of format and structure to manage and work through those ideas. So how does that relate then? How do we bring that to life in Live QI? Obviously, if you're used to running projects, you'll be well aware of the PDSA functionality, and we'll have a look at that in a second. A couple of things we want to highlight, as well as just the standard kind of PDSA form, but it's about plotting those PDSAs then on the charts. And we'll come to that when we look at the charting bit in a minute. So we're going to be able to visualize what we changed and when, and trying to visualize the impact of that. Partly it's about grouping the PDSAs and organizing them in such a way that you can see those ramps, you can see how they relate to different change ideas, you can see how you've evolved those tests and those kind of ideas for savings. And also thinking then about using PDSAs as the mechanism for kind of capturing and planning the sort of the spread and scale of these different changes to try and grow the level of savings. So let's jump now into Live QI, and we'll see how some of that comes to bear. Before I dive into the PDSA section, just to ground you very briefly, the sort of the demo project we're going to be going through is one on reducing stationary costs. We've set this up so as a project dedicated to this form of cost saving in this particular area. Again, we see this is fairly typical. It's not just a generic cost saving project, very much targeted at a specific area. Therefore, there is an aim statement that's very targeted at that particular area. So yeah, we filled out the charter with the basic information there. We might come back to some of this, particularly the tags, a little bit later. We've built out a driver diagram to try and frame how we're going to attack this problem, how the different dimensions that affect that problem. I'm not going to dwell too much on this. It's, you know, the standard use of a driver diagram within a project like this. Partly what we're going to do is it's allowed us to capture our first set of change ideas and then start to work on some PDSA cycles that relate to those. We can see that some of these down here have already got PDSA ramps linked to them, which we're going to go and have a look at in a minute. But partly what I want to highlight here is kind of the linkage between different parts of the project. As well as being able to create those PDSA cycles, we have linked them to the driver diagram, to the change ideas, so that when just viewing this particular page, I can see that we're already making some progress or doing some work, if you like, on these particular change ideas at the bottom. But the ones at the top, so the kind of the top half of the diagram, we haven't really started to address yet in terms of this project. So it's useful to make that linkage back and forth between the different elements, to be able to see where you are and aren't working, or what might lay ahead, really. We dive into the PDSA section. I guess for those that are perhaps newer or less familiar with this, this is where you'd come in to create your PDSA cycles, and using the grey button over here, it will walk you through a short wizard to create a PDSA cycle. Here on the page, we've got a number that have already been created and populated, and we'll explore these in a second. So first of all, at the top here, where they're grouped, they tend to be grouped by the different change ideas. As I explained, we've made that linkage when we've created these. So you can see the first one was all around stopping to use paper reports for our corporate meetings. And what we've then done, and we'll explore in a second, is we've then kind of iterated on that, and we've created another PDSA cycle where we've kind of taken the same change and then started to apply it to the medical division. Again, this is partly just good use of the functionality of the template for using PDSAs, being thorough about it, so not allowing those ideas to float around. Those ideas are captured as PDSA cycles, and we make fairly methodical use of the PDSA form. We go to the trouble of linking the measure that relates to this PDSA. We're partly just making sure that there is a measure that relates to this PDSA, but also then making that linkage so that we're able to visualize that either from here or from the chart, which we'll look at in a few moments. And then using that do, study, act information to provoke that thought process to think about partly, you know, where do we go next with this? And one of the takeaways from this one was that it kind of worked, and therefore we're going to take this change and implement it kind of the next division on the list, if you like. So we'll explore the impact of that when we look at the charts in a minute. But we're able to sort of properly document that PDSA cycle and how that had worked in the corporate department. And then subsequent to that, we've started to plan it out in the medical division. And what we can see from the kind of color coding on the right-hand side here, which is a little bit subtle, but this top one is all dark blue, as it were. So we've completed all four segments or sections of that cycle. But this next one, we've only got as far as the plan. So if we were to click into that, we can see that the plan has begun to be built out, but we haven't got as far as this kind of the do, study, act information. So that list, PDSA list, is kind of prompting us as to what the next logical thing is. We need to begin to build out that PDSA cycle. And if we need to, maybe this is quite a large piece of work, we can add to that by getting into the tasks section for this PDSA cycle and start to plan out the tasks and assign them to people. Let's jump back up to that. I'm just going to switch back here slightly. So I talked a little bit about grouping them, I guess, into ramps by change ideas, and then the spread and scale piece as well. Yeah, here's just another example where we planned out another PDSA cycle. So you can see we're fairly early in the stages of this project. There are only 3 PDSA cycles, and these 2 at the top here are kind of an extension of the single theme, which is why it's all grouped together under the single change idea. So that's that. I'm going to move on in a second. I'm just going to pause for a moment there. Andrew, are there any questions that have popped in so far related to the PDSA stuff before I can move to the next item?
No, no questions have popped in yet.
Perfect. Carry on then. So next subject, tracking the costs and measuring savings. This is perhaps the more interesting and slightly more complicated part of this sort of subject matter. I've already alluded to it a few times already, kind of the tracking side of things. A few bits we're going to share on the left here in terms of some best practice, and then again, we'll dive into some specific tips we've got listed on the right. The first is, and this partly relates to the functionality that we've got in LifeQI really, but it's about measuring costs over time rather than measuring savings over time. And the reason we suggest that, and because of the way we've seen it done before, is the charts that we've got in LifeQI, at least at present, are run charts and control charts about measuring data over time and monitoring the variation and looking for significant variation. And so they very much lend themselves better to measuring the running costs of a process over time and looking for variation in that, ideally, obviously, reducing the running costs of that particular process. We've got some examples we'll look at in a minute, but see how we can then begin to visualize those savings. It makes a lot more sense if you're measuring, the ongoing cost of something rather than the savings you achieve each month, basically. So what related to that is about the frequency of measurement. This is a fairly standard kind of tip, if you like, when it comes to measuring data for improvement projects, but particularly where you are able to measure the costs of a process over time, the more frequently we're able to measure those costs, i.e. kind of monthly, weekly, is much better than an annual cost, because far more quickly we can see a change in that cost and begin to attribute it to the work that we've done, the PDSA cycles that we've done. So yeah, general bit of SBC advice, if you like, there. Yeah, the kind of understanding what to measure and getting a hold of the data is always the classic sort of challenge with any of these sorts of bits of work, and that's not specific to cost improvement work. I guess that's an improvement project challenge generally, but what we have seen here from others is, I guess, that the point, don't let perfection be the enemy of good enough. It can be very difficult to accurately get hold of, or to get hold of accurate cost data for a particular process or service. And it doesn't mean don't try, but often it means that you have to think of other opportunities to find something that relates to a cost, whether that's estimating the cost based on the information you can get. Even seen examples of kind of cost proxies. So yeah, you can't identify the exact cost, but is there something else that we can measure? And by reducing that, we can make a logical conclusion that we have reduced the cost. An example that I've seen of this, which relates to the subject matter we've got in our project, was more about the cost of paper, reducing the cost of printing paper. At the project at the time, we couldn't actually get hold of a cost for a ream of paper because it's such a big organization and the way procurement worked, but we could track how many times the big printers had to be updated, had to have the printer trays refilled with reams of paper. And by monitoring that and seeing a reduction in the number of times they had to refill the printer, we were able to then use that as a bit of a proxy for, well, we're spending less on paper because we're filling the printer up less. So it's looking outside of the box, if you like, for other opportunities to find what could be the costs or the partial costs of a process. If you can't measure every part of that, which parts can you get the cost data for, and then look to track that. Next one, converting short-term savings into annualized figures. Most organizations tend to work with kind of the annual budget, or to look at budgets and costs and annual figures. But if we relate that back to where we started, this point around measuring costs frequently, you might be making weekly or monthly savings, but can you then annualize those figures? It becomes partly a bit more powerful. It's a bigger number, but often that's how some of these savings need to be reported and related around the organization. So that's a bit of translation that often kind of needs to be done. And then last but not least here, don't forget the balancing measures. Saving cost certainly can't come at the expense of quality, particularly in the healthcare sector. Often need to look at other costs that could be impacted by the work that you're doing to save costs in one area. We don't want to be increasing costs in another area, or if we are, we need to be aware of that, and that needs to be an informed, if you like, decision. And then there's other aspects such as like the experience. Yes, you might cut the cost of a process, but if it adversely affects staff satisfaction or patient experience, then often that cost saving isn't worth it. So it's being aware, what do we need to measure alongside those costs to make sure that we're not adversely impacting the system in a way that we don't want to. So relating some of that to Live QI, the first point around eye charts. So often the go-to chart type in Live QI and for a lot of this sort of work, run charts. People are most familiar and most comfortable with run charts, but there are disadvantages of using them compared to the control charts. An eye chart is still pretty straightforward to use and does provide greater fidelity when it comes to analyzing the data and looking for variation. So I guess where possible, we would encourage people using eye charts, and that they do work for where you're measuring, cost over time. They are a relevant chart choice, as it were. So the examples we're going to look at in a minute are eye charts. A point we made earlier about the PDSAs, but we'll look at it in a second, is plotting the PDSAs on those charts so we can visualize when we made that change and begin to visualize whether it had the right kind of impact or not. So we'll see that. And then we're going to explore how we can potentially use multiple charts under the same measure to monitor local costs and then aggregate those up to an organization level. So let's dive straight into that. So in our measures and charts section of the project, again, just like PDSAs, you need to come in and create new ones, button on the right-hand side, but we've already got a few already set up, a couple of outcome measures and a balance measure. Good example here being, because we're trying to reduce stationary costs, we might spend less on ink and paper, but if that means we're going to spend way more on laptops and tablets, that might not be a cost saving that really balances out. So that's partly why we got that as a balance measure. What I wanted to explore in here was this particular printer ink costs. We'll have a look into this one. So we've set this up as an eye chart. And what we were able to do is we were able to look back at kind of the baseline data. So although the project's only started recently, we were able to upload a whole load of baseline data, which is obviously helpful, plot that on an eye chart. So we've then got, in this case, what was a monthly cost that was spent across all departments for printer ink. You can see that it was generally a fairly stable cost. And then what we've done to help visualize clearly where we're making changes is moving the chart from the baseline phase into the test phase, as we can see from the demarcation there, moves into the test phase. So we fixed the control limits at that point and projected them forwards. So we can see that we were spending almost exactly £16,000 a month on printer ink in this particular example. We've then moved into the test phase. We've run a PDSA cycle, which we've plotted at, in the month that we instigated it. And click on that, I can see the name of that PDSA cycle. And it's pretty clear that it's instigated a fairly significant change in the cost. We've seen that drop that month and remain stable. And that's partly just because of the nature of that PDSA cycle, that it is then kind of a flat line. Clearly caused some outliers in the data. So it makes it very straightforward in this case to visualize, we were spending £16,000 a month. We're now spending, looks like £14,000 a month. So we appear to have made £2,000 a month saving. We've stabilized that for the last 5 months. And indeed, it looks like we've begun to make an even greater saving. So it's then very easy to take that 2,000, annualize that in 24,000 and start to kind of report those savings and start to then ideally what we're going to do is build on other PDSA cycles, say, right, we've banked 24,000. How do we now move on and start to make other savings in other areas? So that's the idea of that. And in this example, we had, one measure, one chart across all departments in the organization. But the next example we're going to look at is where we actually wanted to break that down a bit more department by department. So here we're looking at the cost of paper, and we've done this in different division by division, essentially. So we'll come back to the aggregate chart in a minute, but we've got a chart for corporate and a chart for medical division. We can analyze those individually and then see how the aggregate picture plays out for the whole organization. A couple of things just going to highlight here on the individual charts before we move to the aggregate is this looks, if you like, much like the other chart we looked at a moment ago. But one thing to point out here is we can see on this particular division, it was within May 2023 that we made these changes and we saw that cost drop fairly significantly. A bit like with the other chart, we plot the PDSA cycle, we've added a note to talk about what was about to happen, visualize and calculate the savings there, nice and straightforward. But because we've done this department by department, it makes it a bit easier to see the timing of some of these changes. So on the medical division, apart from the fact that the process here or the costs were a bit more unstable, we can see that it wasn't actually until August that we made any changes, we instigated any PDSA cycles. And whilst they did have a good effect, and obviously there was a bit of a delay between what we did in the last division versus what we did in this division, makes it nice and easy to see that on the kind of individual charts, sort of division by division. But then the power of the aggregate charts, which are automatically generated and automatically updated as we make changes to these, is that we can kind of see that almost two-step improvement in the cost at an organizational level. So yeah, in our baseline period, we were running along here at a total cost or central line cost of about 11,000. We can then see in May, we saw this first PDSA cycle, which, as this shows us, was corporate division. They made a change. We can see the cost drop there fairly significantly and stabilized for a few months. And then in August, we see it drop again, which relates back to what the other division did. And by clicking on that PDSA cycle, you can see that it was the medical division then instigated its change. So we were able to measure, division by division, what savings they've made and the impact of that. Then up at this level, we can see the overall savings made across the organization, and hopefully we will continue to build on that, obviously. As I said, you don't have to build and update this chart. As soon as the teams update these individual charts and plot their PDSA cycles, that will be automatically output on here. Okay, I'm going to pause there and just flip back to the agenda. And I think you want to add in all questions, Andrew?
No, nothing to add. No questions also, but feel free, everybody, to pop us any questions you have. Remember, no question is a silly question, so ask away.
Great, thank you. Okay, I think we're making pretty good time. Let's move through. So there's potentially more to unpack. As I say, that's kind of the tricky part of many projects, whether they're cost saving or not. So yeah, if you've got specific questions or scenarios, we're happy to deal with those in follow-up meetings, particularly around the measurement side of that. But what we'll move on to now is more the reporting side of this. So assuming that we've got a whole bunch of these cost improvement projects set up or going to be set up in LiveQI now, the all-important question of how do we kind of track and report on those, just like we do with any obviously improvement project. But as we've highlighted on the left here, these sorts of projects, ones that have positive financial implications, generally get some pretty significant attention and support. Many stakeholders keen to see them successful. So one of the key things we want to do here is make sure it's easy to kind of ring fence them, to report on them, whether that's at an organization level or a departmental level, basically. So one of the key mechanisms for that, not the only, but probably the one we would recommend most strongly for just identifying these sorts of projects, is the use of tags. We'll have a look at that in a second. And then it's then tagging all of those projects with the relevant tag that you can create. I'll show you how to do that. And then the different mechanisms you've got for then feeding that into the reporting cycle, basically. If I jump back to my project, I'm going to go back up to the main project menu and into the general page. If you're not too familiar with the tags yet, so the general page of the project down underneath the main charter, you've then got this tag section here. See, on this one, we've already added a couple of tags, a cost saving tag and an acronym one, just cost improvement project tag. So this project's already been tagged, just demonstrate how to add tags and also how to create new tags if you don't already have a cost saving one. So I've got to click edit to make changes to this page. I've then got the add a tag option that becomes available. So click into that, gives me a bit of a search. These are the tags that I've generally added regularly to projects. So if you'll see a slightly different list, but those are just kind of the ones you happen to use more regularly. You can search for, I can spell, search for a particular subject. If there's already a tag that exists, then it will appear in the list. But if you search for something that doesn't exist, then can't find a tag, you can then go through the process of creating a new tag, call it what you want, click create, and it will have created that and kind of added that to your project. Click out of that, and you can see I've now added my gobbledygook tag to the project. So yeah, it's as easy as that. Once the tag has been created, it's then going to be available on all your other projects in the organization as well. So we've been through and tagged all of our cost improvement projects with this. We'll see that in a minute. But that was just to demonstrate how to create a new tag if it doesn't already exist within the organization. What I've done then is, as I said, we've tagged all of our projects with this sort of SIP tag, and we're then able to report on them in a few different ways. One of which is if I go to the projects list, so I want to run off a report, a kind of a list type report that just brings together some summary information on all of those. Come into the projects area, and I'm then going to kind of filter to those sorts of projects. So a couple of things I'm going to make here. I don't want it to be just my projects. I want it to be my organization's projects. Set it to that and untick the fact that I don't have to be direct member. Scroll down to the tag section of the filters, and then in here, I search for our CIP tag, search for that, and it's updated that list. So now click out of that, I can see that those are all the projects that we've got that are active across our organization with the cost improvement project tag. Great, we've got that list. I can now go actions and reports and run off a report that will be based on the projects that are now showing in that list. So yeah, actions, reports. Here you will see, well, I've only got one report template available. You may have others depending on what sort of report templates your organization has set up. Select the relevant report template. And then, yeah, I want to use the current list, and then just click run report, and it will run the project summaries report on these 5 projects, basically. So it's sort of straightforward as that, in order to get a list of those projects and run off that report. So that's one option. The other, as we've got on here, is more about dashboards. So there's a couple of options here. Firstly, you could create a dashboard that is specific to just these cost improvement projects. So that could be using an existing dashboard structure that you've got, in terms of we've already defined the metrics that you want to report on for, say, a particular department. You can essentially use that same dashboard structure, but just use it to report on the cost improvement projects. And that's just a case, and we can help with that, of filtering this dashboard basically to that tag that we've set up. And that means that I load up this dashboard, and it shows me right now, we've got 11 cost improvement projects that are active across this data set. Further to that, we've got 4 that are complete. I can click on all of these numbers. If you're not familiar with the dashboards, you can click on all of these and it will open up a new tab with the list of those projects. So an important one here, I'm counting how many stalled projects I've got that are cost improvements. If I click on that number 2, it will show me the 2 that are stalled. So they definitely going to need some attention, because they're meant to be saving us some money, but they don't appear to be going anywhere. So yeah, being able to highlight useful bits of information like that at literally sort of the click of a button is really helpful, particularly given the sort of priority given to these bits of work. Can also then relate them to some of the other factors that you might be using to track. So how many of the cost improvement projects have got a big level of service user involvement or a little level, those sorts of things. Other elements, another subject that we've been doing more on around patient safety incidents. How many of these cost reduction initiatives, relate to something to do with the patient safety incident? So you can kind of have that traceability. Indeed, just list out the projects at the bottom of the dashboard. So yeah, one option is dashboards that are specific to the cost improvement projects. Another option is take one of your existing dashboards and essentially add some cost improvement metrics or charts to it. So you might want to just add some extra metrics, another line of metrics. So rather than just reporting on all of our projects that are showing improvement, there could be another line of numbers here which are count the number of cost improvement projects that are showing improvement or significant improvement. Things like this look at how many projects we've got in each of our divisions. Again, I could have another version of that that's filtered purely to cost improvement projects. I could track how many cost improvement projects we create every month by replicating that and filtering it. Indeed, if these are our priority areas, how many cost improvement projects have we got that relate to each of those? Again, another example would be filtering it to the different divisions. If I just want some nice clear numbers, how many cost improvement projects have we got in each of our divisions? That would do that basically. Again, we can help with updating any existing dashboards that your organization's got. Feel free to reach out to your customer success manager or just drop us a line through our help email address that will flash up at the end. Nice and straightforward. We can help with updating those if you wish to. Okay, anything else you want me to touch on, Andrew, before I move on?
There was one question from Tara. So yeah, I think it's going back to where you were talking about the measures and charts. So if you annualize your figures, did you put that as a predicted value and then go back and measure what that figure is in reality once you have an annual figure?
Okay, I think I see what you mean. I suppose it probably depends on the actual nature of what it is you're measuring. Sometimes, if you've made a monthly saving on a particular contract, you know that you can just times that by 12 if you like, and that is going to be the saving. Some contracts it's not going to be, or some costs it's not going to be that straightforward. I think from where I've seen this fairly quickly, people are interested in how does what you've done now relate to what could be an annual saving? So they are going to want that predicted figure sooner rather than later. I think it's certainly best practice to monitor what the reality is against that prediction, recognizing that sometimes projects don't run that far. So sometimes you need to make the prediction and that needs to be reported, but before the project is finished or before that annual cost has really been realized. But yeah, I guess it depends on the nature of what it is you're measuring and your reporting requirements. But certainly wherever we've seen this, people fairly quickly tend to want to see an annualized type of figure, partly because it's going to affect the next round of budgeting and things like that. So hopefully that was, if I've understood the question correctly,
Yeah.
hopefully that was helpful.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks, Chase. And that's it. I've pretty much answered the other couple questions that are there.
Okay. All right. Well, a few points, couple of sort of closing points almost. I'm nearly there on time as well. The last one, this is maybe fairly straightforward. I'm not going to dive back into Live QI for this, but the idea of maximizing impact with spread and scale. So yeah, you've proved out an improvement, a cost reduction, a cost avoidance in one area. How can we now maximize the impact of that? How can we spread that to other departments, other divisions, or scale up that saving? A couple of different mechanisms for this. One is within the remit of your existing project, then creating extra PDSA cycles that look to replicate whether that's spread or scale up that saving within the kind of the bounds of the existing project. Sometimes that's how it's done, particularly if it's not huge or organization wide sort of spread. The other mechanism is actually you close out that initial project, that kind of proving project, that test project, and we set up dedicated projects, often with different teams, new teams in different departments, and they look to spread or to scale up that change. They may look to replicate it in their own department or division. That's often done through separate projects. So those are the two kind of mechanisms for doing that. What can be quite helpful is making sure there is some traceability if you do separate projects. So there's some traceability that this new project that we're running is essentially a spread project, and it relates back to the project that we ran before in the corporate division. Again, an easy way of doing that, just demarcating it as a spread or as a scale-up project, is to create tags for all those. And again, it then makes it a bit easier to trace, okay, we've got 5 spread projects that are taking place and their cost improvement projects. Again, that might give them extra attention from certain stakeholders because we're looking to implement something that's already been proven elsewhere and it's going to reduce costs. Having that traceability or being able to identify those easily can be fairly powerful, basically. So that was, not really too much to demonstrate in the system there, but a useful point to make. And then, almost finishing up, I guess a bit of a slightly circling back to some of the opening comments, but I guess I'm relating this to some of what we've seen, particularly from different countries who place more or less emphasis on cost improvement projects run by what is often the quality improvement team. We do see a kind of a variation. I think looking across the different about 9 countries that we service, this no longer seems to be a nice to have. This is becoming very much, if that isn't already, it's becoming sort of part of the daily work of improvement teams. It's an absolute sort of strategic imperative that improvement teams are doing this, are playing their role in delivering or supporting, contributing towards kind of this corporate level priority, basically. And we also see it as an increasingly, so almost an opportunity for improvement teams to demonstrate some of the value and impact of improvement methods and improvement teams. Not the leadership in every organization really looks to the improvement team to help save costs necessarily. They think it's more about quality and things like that. And actually it's an opportunity to demonstrate that there are many strings to the improvement bow, as it were, and deployed correctly, the improvement methods, the improvement team can make a big difference to saving costs while still trying to balance, see the quality of care and the other factors that go into that. So that's partly just a little bit of a concluding comment from us. I kind of hope that's all been helpful and useful, and there are already some insights in there. As I said, if you're already familiar with LifeQI, probably wouldn't have seen any new functionality in there. It's more just about translating or relating that to this sort of subject matter. Do stay in touch if anyone wants to find out more about the specific bits of functionality or how other people are doing this work, then get in touch. Easiest is through our help email address, help@lifeqisystem.com. I think Andrew shared some of the help articles as we moved through this, but if you haven't already checked out the help center, you can find that help.lifeqisystem.com, all sorts of different how-to articles on there. And subjects like this we often write about on our blog, so you can get to that, blog.lifeqisystem.com. All sorts of different subjects we write about, not just about the functionality, but around improvement methods and improvement practices. So check that out. And you can kind of keep an eye on all of that and follow us through on X and LinkedIn as well. We post all of our blog articles out there, so you'll get notified through there. So yeah, we've got a couple of minutes left. I'm going to pause there. Andrew, any other questions, any final comments from yourself? We'll let everyone crack on with the day.
No questions. No questions have come in. Give it a couple seconds. If anyone's got any more questions, please do pop them into the chat and let us know. But yeah, no questions have come through.
Perfect. Okay, thank you very much. I do hope that was helpful. Look forward to seeing you again soon. Likewise, if you've got ideas for other webinars, other subjects you would like us to present on, then get in touch with anyone that you know here, or drop the help email address. Drop your ideas into that, and we'll pick that up and we can look to work on that. Always looking for new ideas and new subjects that people are interested in. So yeah, enjoy the rest of your days. Hope that was helpful, and see you all soon. Thank you.
Take care, everyone.